So welcome everybody. Thanks very much for coming to join this session. My name's Sharon Elliott from BEC2, and it's my pleasure to introduce this session, which really focuses on the concerns that new entrants have in trying to get established, trying to get in, let alone get established, I suppose. This session, we're using it as an opportunity to promote a new service from BEC2, the industry trade union, called the Creative Toolkit, which basically hosts a lot of information focused on your rights. If you're working freelance, how do I need to organise myself? What are my rights to be paid? If I want to pursue an issue of non-payment, how do I go about it? We're also adding to the site a series of help notes. There are two up there at the moment. One deals with business skills for freelancers, the other with CV writing. Obviously, we'll be, as I say, putting more online in the coming weeks. I've been here for 3 days, or at the end of today I would have been here for 3 days. It's been absolutely fantastic show, absolutely fantastic support generally. It's been a privilege to meet with so many young people, also with their tutors in particular, coming to the site, keen to know what Creative Toolkit is all about. We encourage you to visit it, we encourage you to register to use the site, to keep in touch with the events in particular that BEC2 organises, to which you are invited. It's absolutely clear that new entrants are having a very difficult time. We absolutely need to do everything we can to push back on the extent of unpaid work opportunities that are blighting the industry, killing people's passion, and also allowing employers to get away with breaking the law. I myself have heard two very disturbing stories over the last couple of days. One person working for a well-known broadcaster for over a year on a freelance basis who is not receiving a penny. My question to her was, well, why are you doing it? The point about Creative Toolkit, we hope, is to actually equip new entrants to think more critically about the opportunities that they are offered, to think more critically about whether there is anything in an unpaid opportunity for them, to obviously develop the confidence, the self-confidence to recognise that you have education, you have skills, you have talent, you're bringing an awful lot to the table, and you need to push that to a much greater extent perhaps than you're doing at the moment. You can influence the situation. We and many other organisations are working to improve the position, working to ensure that the national minimum wage regulations are enforced, but you absolutely need to begin to think, as I say, more critically. You need to help yourselves. You need to say no to some of these opportunities because they're not delivering anything for you. When you start valuing yourselves, you will be valued. I just hope that you'll take something good from this session today. Pleased to say that we've got Martin Spence from BEC2 sitting in the middle. On his far right, or on the far right, is Andy Snell from the HMRC, from the department responsible for enforcing the national minimum wage regulations. And on my immediate right is Gus Baker from Internaware, one of many organisations, but one of the best actually, assisting people taking on internships and understanding how they can best make use of those opportunities. So I'm going to stop speaking there and hand over to Martin, who's going to kick us off, I think. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for coming. I mean, it's great that we've got standing room only. Andy said a couple of minutes ago, we can all go home after this and claim that we filled Earl's Court. Which I guess, in a manner of speaking, we have done. So thanks for your interest. And I guess the interest is justified because this is a crucial discussion that we're about to have. Let me just set out some markers as to why BEC2 is so active on this issue of unpaid work and of broader unfair treatment of young people and new entrants coming into our industries, into the media and entertainment industries. We're a trade union, and there are many views about trade unions, about what they do well and what they don't do perhaps so well, but all trade unions are fired by a sense of justice at work. I mean, that's our essential mission. It's to try to deliver justice, fairness, a fair deal at work. And for young people to be regularly exploited in the way that they are in our industries, and our industries, I'm afraid, I'm ashamed to say, are recognised by the government as a particular problem area in this regard, for young people to be regularly working unpaid, simply because this is an attractive industry in which to work, and so there are many young people desperate to get in, and there are certain employers prepared to take advantage of that. For that situation to exist is shameful and dishonourable and unjust. So we're active on the case because it is unjust to the young people that we hear about on a regular basis, who are putting in long hours and working very hard and bringing all they can to the post, but not being paid for their work, because they're defined sometimes as being just on work experience. And there is a perfectly legitimate and honourable way of being on work experience, but we see it widely abused. Or because they're defined as volunteers. And there is a perfectly legitimate, honourable way of being a volunteer, but it's widely abused. Very often those terms are used to describe situations which in our clear view are actually work. Young people are working, they're bringing value and adding value to an employer's business, but they're not being paid, and they should be. It's unjust, so it's our business. It's also bad for our industry. It's also really bad for our industry, because we are losing out on a wealth of talent which is out there and which ought to be finding a place in our industry. I mean, this is not rocket science. Just think about it. If, as a young person trying to get started, you are being told that the only way to get started is to do a month or 3 months or 6 months or a year or whatever period it may be, working without being paid, then the only sorts of young people who can actually sign up for that are frankly young people from rather privileged backgrounds. You know, drawing on what is often called the bank of mum and dad. I mean, how else can you do it? How else can you make it work? How else can you possibly pay the rent if you've got rent to pay, or fill the fridge if you're actually responsible for feeding yourself, if you haven't got some private source of income? At a stroke, therefore, the range of talent and the range of social and class backgrounds which are offering young people to come into this industry, and we do need to recruit from a range of social and class backgrounds, because our industry is meant to be performing the role of holding a mirror up to society. What else is media and entertainment about? It's about projecting back to society the range of experiences and aspirations and problems and debates that as a society, as a healthy democratic society, we need to have. But if the people doing that job are drawn from an increasingly narrow social and class base because nobody else can afford even to get started, we've got a problem. We've got a problem as an industry, and actually we've got a problem as a society. So that's the second reason why we're very active on this, because as the trade union for the media and entertainment industries, we feel we have a duty of care to make sure our industry is actually delivering that role. And thirdly, of course, it's illegal. We have a national minimum wage in place in this country that says if you're a worker, and that's quite clearly defined, and if you're working for an employer, and that's clearly defined, you must be paid a defined hourly rate for every hour you work. End of story. Very simple. Again, it's not rocket science. The problem is, of course, that for many young people as individuals, you feel very isolated, you feel it's just you don't want to perhaps give yourself a reputation as a troublemaker, as an awkward customer, and it does feel like there's 100 reasons why you shouldn't actually ask questions, why you shouldn't actually take up the challenge, why you shouldn't actually insist on your rights. That's why we're here as a union, to collectivise the issue, to actually make sure that it's not you as an individual that's in the frame, but to try to make it a joint issue, a collective issue rather than an individual problem, And that's why Creative Toolkit is here as a service to you to draw on the strength of others and find a way forward together. We believe that's the way to solve this problem, but it's a problem we have to solve because it's not an individual problem, it's a collective problem of justice and of the professionalism and the proper role which our industries ought to be playing in society. For us as a union, it's a no-brainer. We have to be involved. We have no choice. So we're here today to explain our position and actually also, because this is going to be a question and answer session, to hear from you what you have to say. That's why we're involved. What I'd like to do now, though, is hand you over to Andy from HMRC, from the enforcement unit that's there to enforce the national minimum wage, just to explain briefly about their role and how they fit into this picture. Andy.
Thank you, Martin. Good afternoon, everybody. Just to explain where we do fit in, the policy and legislation is owned by the Department of Business Innovation and Skills. We are engaged by BIS to enforce those regulations, and together we work in partnership to ensure that every worker who is entitled to national minimum wage gets it. That's our overriding primary objective. To do that, we have a twin-track approach. One is that we respond to all worker complaints via the Pay and Work Rights Helpline. Now, that's a free phone service that the government organises. It guarantees anonymity if you wish to remain anonymous. And as a result of lodging your complaint there about issues relating to your pay, that will be directed to one of our teams. We have 18 across the UK that will then engage with you in the first instance to ascertain what exactly is the problem, to find out what the circumstances are in which you find yourself working, to then engage directly with the employer to ascertain what their view is of proceedings, and then to try and establish whether in fact you are due arrears. Now, if you are, we will of course issue a notice of arrears to that employer, and within 28 days we'll get you your money. And if they do not get your money within 28 days, we will obviously take legal proceedings to ensure that that happens. So there's a very clear route from you having a query, which subsequently becomes a complaint about your pay, to us taking action. And we endeavour to do that within 30 days to start that process. And whilst that may not be completed within 30 days, we would certainly look to start it and make sure that we are engaging with the employer to find out what's happening. We have a range of sanctions that we will take against recalcitrant employers. But the important thing here today for me to convey to you is that we cannot take action for you if we do not know what your situation is. So I'd strongly encourage you to use the free phone Pay and Work Rights Helpline, because that is the direct link between you and us. So let us know what's happening, what you feel about it. We will talk that through with you. We will clarify any issues, as indeed will the Pay and Work Rights Helpline, incidentally, because they're qualified to understand what the issues are as well. And if they feel that there is something that we need to investigate, we'll pass your query over. It may well be that your problem will be resolved at that point. But either way, that is the route in, and please take that course of action, because, as I said, if we do not know that you exist or that you have a problem, we can't do anything about it. And we want to, because as I said at the start, our overriding aim for all workers across all trade sectors is that if you are entitled to the national minimum wage, we will endeavour to ensure that you get it. Thank you.
My name's Gus Baker. A few years ago, I got really hacked off with unpaid internships. I was trying to apply for jobs, and I kept coming up against a brick wall of, if you want to get into industry X and do thing X, you have to give up 3 months of your time, my whole summer, a huge amount of time, for no money at all. And I could just about manage to do it if I had no money and borrowed money from my parents. But I thought of all my friends who weren't going to be able to do that. And I thought about my friend from Swansea, fantastic journalist. He'd be brilliant in loads of different sectors in the media, real talent. Well, he's stuck working in a fish and chip shop. His talent's not going to be seen because this unpaid internships, they act as a complete wall, because so many of the jobs are based in London. The rents in London are so high that unless you have that financial backing, you can't do it. And so me and a friend, we got together and we put up a Facebook group called Interns Must Be Paid the Minimum Wage. And then we sort of dusted our hands off and went, right, we've done something good there. And then slowly we saw hundreds and then thousands of young people, first our friends and then our friends' friends, rather, people we didn't know, saying, yeah, this is something that really speaks to me. And this is a few years ago, before it had been in the issue, before so many other organisations had taken it up. And so we were touched by that, and so we started our campaign, Intern Aware, the campaign for fair paid internships, to make sure, nothing radical, to make sure that young people who were doing work, who were adding value to workplaces, were paid a fair wage. Because it is just that, it's fair. You have a right to the minimum wage. You have a right to it. You can't sign it away. If you agree with your employer at the beginning that you'll work for free for 3 months, that doesn't matter. You still have a right to the minimum wage, and you're still, and I'll get onto this in a second, you're still allowed to claim back wages unpaid up to 6 years after you've done that placement. And we can talk about that in a second. A few examples, and these are horror stories, but my guess is, from looking around young people in the audience, there's going to be just as many horror stories here. There was a guy who was working for the Independent newspaper, and he was writing stories in the Independent. He had his name in the paper. He was doing real work, no doubt about that. And he said to the deputy editor of a national paper, can I just have Thursday and Friday off, because I need to work to pay the bills and I can't stay here, it's really expensive, I've run out of money. And this deputy editor of the Independent screamed at him in front of the office, I could replace you with hundreds of other people, everyone else would love to be in the seat that you are, you've got the best opportunity, your name's in the paper, you'll never work in this industry again if you try and leave now. And it's this sort of abuse that keeps me going with this campaign part-time, because he had a right to the minimum wage, and so many people here who've done those placements will have had a right to the minimum wage. Another example I heard on Monday, someone who did an internship in the media and was asked by her boss to give a dog a walk and to pick up dog poo on what was supposed to be her lunch break for free. Insane that people are being asked to do these tasks, and it's raw exploitation of young people, and we don't have to stand for it. But then there was an intern. She was working for free, and she was working on an online media website, and she was managing 3 other interns who were working for free. And she joined a trade union, got in touch with them, and said, look, this situation isn't fair. And she was guided through a process of reporting the abuse, talking to lawyers, and then she went through that process, and she was awarded thousands of pounds worth of wages that had been unpaid back to her, back in her pocket, and that employer now pays their interns because that they know that they have to. And that's the message that I want to give to you today. We can end these unpaid internships. Overwhelmingly, they are illegal. If they're work and you're not being paid, that is illegal. And work it might be being a runner for people in the room. If you're running from place to place, you're a worker. You're doing work that people should be paying you for. If they're not, that's illegal, and you can claim back those wages. And so what I'd do if I was in your situation, firstly, join a trade union. If you're in this industry, join Beck2. Make sure you have people on your side who can get your voices heard. It's essential. I know what it feels like to be young. You don't have all the contacts, you don't have the confidence. It's difficult to contact employers and feel like you're going to be that awkward customer. But if enough people get together and do it, we can genuinely end this exploitation. And so make sure you report your unpaid internships to that Pay and Work Rights helpline. We get lots of emails through from people on these placements. Make sure you tell someone about it, because then we can take action. And also make sure you know your rights. Go on the Creative Toolkit website, know what you're entitled to, and there's nothing wrong with saying to employer, I'm doing work for you, I've been here for a while, I deserve to be paid. I've seen people who've written that email to their boss, copied in Intern Aware, and I've seen the responses saying, oh, we didn't realise you weren't being paid, that's an oversight. Of course it wasn't, but as soon as you show that you're willing to take action, employers often know they're doing something wrong and hopefully will be willing to pay you. So thanks very much, and look forward to hearing your questions.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks to all of our speakers, and as Gus says, it's over to you. Happy to take your questions.
I wonder if you could just explain the difference between an internship work experience and an apprenticeship?
But apprenticeships, by and large, are a government-sponsored scheme where there is an in-work learning programme associated with it. It's a formal scheme. Work experience can take many forms, but as far as national minimum wage is concerned, it is only exempt from national minimum wage if it is part and parcel of a learning programme within a further education institution. What was the other one you said? Internship. Now, internship in terms of NMW legislation has no place at all. It's a made-up term. I don't know how it's arrived at. If you look in the dictionary, it talks about hospital development of hospital professionalism and so on and so forth originally. But it's a commonly used term now. We don't recognise it in NMW legislation, and it sometimes is a label that is put on workers that deflects them from the fact that they are and should be paid. So on that very point, though, any issues that are put to the Pay and Work Rights Helpline about internships, HMRC directs to our specialist team to take action with that. So we will dedicate our specialist resource to deal with intern issues, primarily because they do need to understand the complexities of the workplace routine to understand them properly. Okay.
Can I just come in and add another term, which is volunteer, which is very important, because volunteers are defined in the legislation, as are workers. I mean, to summarise the difference very simply, key question is, who's in control of this? If you can come and go as you please, if you can turn up on one day or not turn up, if you can turn up at 9 in the morning one day and, you know, lunchtime the next day, and it's entirely up to you, then probably you're a volunteer. But if there is an expectation that you will turn up to carry out tasks for somebody else at times and places that they define and they dictate, chances are you're a worker. Important to understand the distinction, because the term volunteer is getting used quite widely in the industry now, when really what we're looking at is work that should be paid for.
I appreciate you being here today, and it's really heartening to know that, you know, you back people in order to get them pay. I graduated from Bournemouth University 15 years ago in 1997 in a degree called Creative Advertising. At the time, that was seen as a way of getting into the industry, doing free unpaid placement, sometimes for months, sometimes for years. I personally couldn't afford to do that, and I went into the marketing industry, but I did do some volunteer work for free for ad agencies, and then I was sort of put on the sort of very lowest sort of book club level, it was called, where you had to work with other people to get a portfolio together to then try and get work. This has not changed in 15 years. It has irreparably damaged my reputation and career in the industry. I've worked in the marketing industries where I've been sexually harassed, I've been physically abused, and when I have sued the companies, you're pretty much blacklisted, which is why I work freelance now, but it still hasn't, you know, I've got a lot of qualifications, I've got a lot to offer. I'm trained in marketing, advertising, makeup artistry, I'm trained as an aerobics teacher, I'm training as a music teacher. It is practically impossible to find work even in a bar now because I have no references. I am appalled at the situation, and I really do hope that everybody here will, you know, be able to find proper bona fide placements that do obviously pay them. But I just wondered if you had any advice for, you know, someone that has been in that situation like myself, and how I can go about obviously finding work and repairing the reputation that has been badly damaged. You know, I've had work that's been copied by people in ad agencies, and then when I've tried to speak to the creative director nicely to address this, I've been screeched at, and then obviously word gets around that you're some kind of troublemaker.
I mean, first of all, my heart goes out to you, and I mean, what you're describing, I'm afraid, is a terrible, extended example, I think, of what we were saying earlier on about just how unfair this whole system is. It sounds as if you've ended up in a particular sort of segment of the industry where I think The culture is particularly vile. And I mean, you've given some pretty good examples of that. But where, in a sense, film, TV, audio-visual production moves over into marketing and advertising, I think there's a different sort of culture there, which is particularly unpleasant. And you've obviously been a victim of that. If you're now freelance, I think that's a wise move. And if you're a freelance involved in any sort of creative work where you are creating product, then it may be, I mean, it will depend on the circumstances and perhaps the nature of the engagement, that you have copyright in your work. I mean, we're very active around issues of copyright because we've got lots of freelance members for whom that's a really live issue, and it's a key asset which they need to mobilise and benefit from in order to have a career. So, I mean, without having an extended one-to-one here with all these other people listening in, I mean, perhaps we could have a chat at the Creative Toolkit stand after the session, but I mean, maybe thinking in those terms, hold on to your freelance status and really be aware of what creative rights and copyright you may have. Perhaps those are two bits of sort of taking yourself forward.
Could I also add something there about, and I do recognise the concerns that people may have about talking about their employers to HMRC and worried about them being blacklisted or sacked or what have you. I will emphasise the fact that you can have quite a benign conversation with the Pay and Work Rights Helpline about your situation. The agents on the end of that line are well informed. They'll be able to understand what you're talking about and explain what the employer's responsibilities are and what you're entitled to. Equally, if it does escalate to being a complaint about the employer, we will guarantee your anonymity if that is what you would wish to have. So it can be quite a benign process where we then go along to your employer to establish what has happened, what is happening, and to identify whether in fact you're being paid correctly. So it can be a benign process. In addition to responding to complaints, we have a targeted enforcement program as well, where we are visiting employers not because somebody has complained, but because we are just checking to ensure that they are fulfilling their responsibilities. So our arrival on their premises doesn't necessarily mean that it's been a complaint, and our officers are trained to ensure that that message is put across very clearly so there is no misunderstanding. But I do understand with small businesses how an employer might think, what's happened here then? It must be you that's complained. I understand that. We do our best to prevent that happening.
What do you think the chances are of the government or HMRC or anyone driving a change to bring in official terms around internships in line with what's happened with apprenticeships, so that there's a legally defined minimum wage for interns? And I know you said that with internships they're not legally defined. What about changing them to call them something like short contract work or something like that, because it is actual work?
There was a suggestion from an organisation called the CIPD, Chartered Institute of Personal Development, that this happened. But their suggestion was that interns get a new category of the minimum wage, which was half price. Now, that half price, what is that? £3 an hour? That's really not enough to live with, and so we still have the same problems going round again. So I think what the government really does need to do, and they're starting to pick up on this issue a tiny bit. The problem is, whenever Nick Clegg stands up and talks about unpaid internships, his office is full of unpaid interns. And the whole of politics is rife with unpaid interns. Whenever we talk to the media, they're rife with unpaid interns. And so what the government needs to do is to change the law to make the advertising of unpaid internships illegal. Because there's nothing illegal about an employer putting up an advert that says, you will work 8 AM till 8 PM every day for no pay. Nothing illegal about that at all. Now, as soon as someone does that job, as soon as they turn up at 8 AM, then the employer's breaking the law. It's crazy. It's a stupid loophole. If they close that down, and if they let Andy and his colleagues investigate not just on the complaints, because I do understand there's huge issues about complaining, because you're always worried it'll be put down to you. As soon as HMRC can investigate just from an advert, well, I'd be very happy to sit one day just linking them to hundreds and hundreds of different adverts, because it ain't hard to find them online. I was at a careers fair last night where there were only paid internships, full of lots of charities, little production companies, etc. And so I wrote down the list of everyone's name there, and next time some huge multi-million-pound company tells me, we just don't have the budget to pay our workers, so sorry, I'll just sit and list out the names of these people much smaller than them who can.
I'm just going to say, I work as an illustrator, and I sometimes go and do pitches, and these pitches end up being like an X factor to see who gets the job.
Yeah.
And this is starting to become quite regular, that I've noticed, that you turn up for an interview, there's 3 of you, you're put into a team or whatever, and you're effectively, you do the job. You do one creative job, and then you're not paid for it, and then you turn up and you see your work has been used. How can you stop kind of that? Because that's another loophole of saying, oh, you're only in effectively for a project, you know, we can't use you, you're not, you know, you've never worked in this industry before, yet they're coming, you're effectively working, you know, through that pitch. So how can you tighten that up?
You're quite right. We've come across that in the art department in film and television, where designers are often asked to do a shed load of work just as a pitch, you know, for the job, for the contract. I guess 2 comments I'd make. Firstly, it's sort of there's a copyright issue here. There's no question at all that whatever creative work you've done in those circumstances is yours. You have copyright in that product. And if somebody else takes it away and uses it, then you have a grievance which can be pursued. I'm not claiming it will be easy to pursue. Copyright law isn't terribly user-friendly, frankly, for individuals, but it's there, and in principle, that's something to hold on to. Secondly, we have negotiated an arrangement, not for illustrators, but for producers and writers in television, whereby if they pitch program ideas, program format ideas to broadcasters, the broadcasters have signed up to a code of practice where that will be clocked and logged and registered, and they have signed a pledge that they will not abuse that if the individual who's made the pitch doesn't actually get the job. Now, it needs policing, it needs following up, but there's an agreement there in principle that recognises exactly the issue you're talking about. So there are models out there to address it, and maybe we need to get illustrators organised collectively so that we can go to the employers and put something equivalent in place.
Certainly from our perspective, a common scenario is that people are engaged for a short period of time to see how they go. Effectively, they're working for that period, but at the end of it, there is the promise of employment, and we would be keen to hear about those instances, because we would see a contract of employment almost from day one in those situations, if not in writing, certainly implied. So please, once again, without sounding like a broken record, use that helpline and let us know when that happens, please, and we will take up your calls.
I've got a question, and I also wanted to add something to the last comment. I've been applying for several internships and work experiences, and I came across at least 3 production companies that recently asked for ideas of very original entertainment shows, you know, in the first application that you fill up online. So it's even before the pitch stage, but you're coming up with these amazing ideas that you take your time to actually think of them, and then you're sending to them, and you never even hear back if you went to the next stage of the process. So I just wanted to know if there is anything that can back us up in that sense as well, in the very early stages of applying for internship. And also back to things of this culture of collaboration that we've got out there now, especially among young filmmakers, that I understand contributing for a student filmmaker that it's making a graduation piece and can't afford to have paid contributors in order to deliver that. But everybody else thinks that today they can just bring on people to work for free in short films, TV pilots, and how does Back2 sees this?
Two really good questions. I mean, on the first, if we're talking about production companies, if those companies are members of PACT, which is the main producers association, PACT has signed up to the code of practice that I just described a minute ago. So basically, you can take it up, you can put that into dispute. They shouldn't be doing that. It's in breach of the code of practice that I've got. I mean, the principle is the ideas are yours, and either you get paid for them taking them up from you, or they remain yours, they remain your copyright, and that's not to be abused. Second question, really good question, because throughout this debate we've been talking about, I suppose implicitly, relatively conventional employment situations. But you're absolutely right. The way this industry works is that a lot of the time, maybe because nothing else is on offer, young people want to keep their hand in, make things happen, work together as friends, as mates, and do something. And the technology allows it. We've developed a model, and you can find details on the Creative Toolkit website, for setting up an association. I mean, you can call it a society, a club, an association, but basically formalizing that collaboration and clearly defining it as absolutely voluntary and clearly defining it as absolutely not an employer-employee, employer-worker relationship that we believe covers that. And the advantage it gives you is that you set it up, you define who the members are, you make your short film for the sake of argument, and if it's a really brilliant little short film and it starts making waves at festivals, you've already got it defined that it belongs to all of you collectively, and no one of you can run off and make a career on the back of it and leave everybody else standing. It's a collaborative, voluntary, creative effort, and perfectly honourable as such, and it's not about a rip-off employer exploiting other people. So we think you just need to define and distinguish those sorts of honourable collaborations from rip-off employers. They're two situations, they're quite separate. The important thing is to be clear going into it that you're doing one, not the other. That's how you get protection against misunderstandings in the future. So go to the Creative Toolkit website and poke around, and you'll find that advice there.
Do we have another question? Okay. Thank you.
Hi. I was just wondering, certain jobs ask for experience, but you can't get experience without getting the job. So how do you go about getting that experience without falling into these traps of unpaid work experience, etc.?
Well, I mean, the first point is it's the employer decides whether or not they're going to pay you or not, and they're a key player. So if you're approaching an employer at the start of what you hope is a job, then I think it's important that you set out in your mind, be very clear about the terms of engagement from day one, and write them down. It may well be you don't have a written contract, doesn't matter. Implied contract is perfectly valid for our purposes. Make sure that you retain any documentation that you're given and record the arrangements in place, and consult with us very early on via, yeah, you've heard it, via that. I wasn't going to say the words. So that you're clear what you are. As Martin says, you could well be volunteering, but then again, you may not be. And it's very few exceptions to the national minimum wage entitlement. So the chances are you will be working, and that's the mindset you should have.
We've had quite a lot of success, and we've got a template on our website for it. Is when you see an unpaid internship that you'd like to do, if you write our model letter, and our website's internaware.org, to that employer and say, this is funny, you seem to be in breach of minimum wage legislation, do it from another account. We've linked this in. We have the funniest responses back from the HR departments of those places going, oh, that was an accident, that was an oversight, it's actually paid £7 an hour. And so we've changed quite a lot of unpaid internships into paid internships by just friendly reminders. And if anyone wants to get in touch, our Twitter thing is up there. Get in touch, and we're very, very happy to give those friendly reminders to employers on internships that they should be paid.
Okay, perhaps the last question I think we're looking at because of time. Is there one out there? Can't see. Right. Yes. Say again.
Great. I'm so glad that I'm not the only one, because really, it's so incredibly isolating and lonely when you're pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and being ignored. So the fact that I'm not crazy, I'm not going mad, is warming. Okay, so I just wanted to ask about when they say expenses. We're not going to pay you, but we're going to pay your expenses. I've been doing it hard for these last few years, and they'll always say, but we're giving you expenses. What are the kind of guidelines around that kind of excuse and reply from employers?
Well, I mean, the starting point, as ever, is what is the arrangement you have with the employer? That's the start and finish of everything, really, from our perspective. Are you, in fact, working or not? And that is the key issue. Yeah. If you're volunteering your service, getting up freely, you've got no constraints on the time you arrive or leave, or the quality and standard of your work, there's no disciplinary proceedings that apply to you, you come and go as free as you want, then you're probably thinking about being a volunteer in that situation. And in that situation, if you don't expect to get paid expenses, but they come along and reimburse you for some costs that you've incurred, that doesn't constitute pay as far as we're concerned, and we would not see you in a working relationship there. However, if you are, as I said, working to constraints, if you are expected to be there at a certain time and leaving at a certain time and doing certain things in between time, then you are entitled to the national minimum wage. The fact that you get expenses as well is irrelevant and is not counted towards how much pay you are due.
Thank you. What if you're employed by a company that is outside the UK? Because that's appealing. You know, somebody offers you a job and they pay you the travel and the expenses for 3 weeks, but you're not getting paid. I mean, would this apply for us to get some help?
It depends. If you're talking about the key issue is, and I'm sorry if this sounds all a bit geeky and boring, the key issue is, what is the law that governs the contract? I mean, you can be physically working outside the UK, but still on a contract by a British-based company that's governed by English law, in which case everything we've said in this session absolutely applies. If it's a French company and they're offering you a contract governed by French law, then none of what we've been saying here, certainly in terms of the legal background, applies. There will be, or maybe equivalent French law about your basic employment rights, and that's what would take account. So the key issue is, which is the national jurisdiction that covers your contract? Well, a contract isn't a piece of paper. A contract is a relationship between you and another party. So, I mean, if the other party is, let's say, a production company, and they are saying to you, we'd like you to do some work as, let's say, a researcher, and you say, fine, great, the dates work for me, I'm available, I'm happy to do it. A contract exists. You've entered into a contract together. There may be a problem proving what the details are if it's only a conversation, so it's sensible to have it in writing, but a verbal contract is a contract. And if the employer is a British employer, then the law governing that verbal contract will be English law. Yes. Am I right?
Yes, you are. And you don't need a piece of paper to have a contract. What are the arrangements that relate to you is the key issue.
Just very quickly near the end, I'm going to do a really cheap plug. This is an industry that unpaid internships really affect, but the fashion industry is just as bad, if not worse. And so, I know what's coming. So tomorrow, at the beginning of London Fashion Week, we've got lots of different students, lots of different young people outside with a protest that we've cleverly called "The Devil Pays Nada."
Thank you very much. Just to say, wonderful to see so many of you here. Thank you for those of you who put questions. You've helped us to illustrate the problem better than we could have imagined. The key message, obviously, is that you can influence the situation. You've heard that there is support on a number of fronts that's available. We need so much to work together to try and push back on the unpaid work situation, and together we can make a change. So please do think about the opportunities you accept. think about getting help where you do accept work that isn't paid, so that the employer is under no illusions whatsoever about their obligations. Join BEC2, join the NUJ if you need to. The case that Gus referred to earlier about the woman who was working on online company, that was an NUJ case that was successful. We ourselves had a very successful case on the point of expenses, demonstrating that expenses is not wages, following up on the point that Gus made, that you cannot contract out of your right to be paid. That was a case that we ran in 2009. So we are acting where we can act. You obviously can inform yourselves better, and hopefully this session has been a great help to you. Thanks very much.